Greetings, Internet. I'm John Bailey, the Popcorn Junkie, and it's been a hot minute, hasn't it? May hasn't been the best month for me behind the scenes, but I'm excited to get back into the swing of things. So, what do we have to review today? Coming back was a mistake.
I know who you are.
Lorraine! Lorraine! Ed! You all right?
I'm not gonna mince words with y'all, but I hate this series. I mean, if you know anything about the actual Warrens and how they were some of the worst con artists in the whole spiritualism scene of the 70s, the fact that we keep getting movies making them out as these would-be heroes would be bad enough. But on top of that, the series continually pumps out some of the worst horror I have ever seen. The first movie was fine. Like, perfectly serviceable, scary movie, but the subsequent sequels and spin-offs have mostly been awful, with the one exception being the Annabelle prequel that managed to at least be somewhat interesting. Otherwise, you've got things like The Crooked Man from The Conjuring 2. Each entry feels cheap and lazy, like no one actually cared, with the last entry being a glorified elevator pitch for future spin-offs. So, you can imagine my surprise when this managed to be at least decent. While the movie does open up with the hackneyed, "This is totally a true story, guys, this totally actually happened" angle, I will say this movie is better than the last couple of entries in the franchise in at least one way. It's not as cheap looking of a jump scare fest. After we open up with an exorcism, we follow one of the family members, Arnie, who took on the demon being exorcised to save the boy who was being possessed. A few days later, Arnie gets arrested for the murder of his landlord, and Ed and Lorraine Warren want his lawyer to basically argue for his innocence on account of demonic possession. You know, the thing that totally happened and is now encoded into US law, that demons exist, and demonic possession is a viable defense against murder. 100% true story, this franchise. In order to prove that demonic possession is real, Ed and Lorraine Warren begin investigating the case with similarities to Arnie's in the hopes of finding who summoned the demon in question. This ends up leading Ed and Lorraine to face off with an actual antagonist for this series, simply named the Occultist. Because why bother giving her an actual name? My major issues with the series are still here. The claims at historical accuracy while simultaneously writing lazy, sometimes terrible stories isn't gone, and I still feel the Warrens themselves are the weakest part of this franchise. Which is nothing against Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. They aren't bad actors by any means, but I've never liked Ed and Lorraine Warren in any of the Conjuring movies, and the actors are not good enough to elevate the bad writing. Plus, this does rely on jump scares and choppy editing enough for it to be distracting from the actual horror of the story. What makes this an improvement is that the director put more effort into the film than we usually get from this franchise. We have certain artistic shots, like there's this one where Arnie turns on the faucet while he's having this episode, and things slow down for us, and it looks very interesting and unique and cool. And the use of colors and the lighting for certain sequences, we get things like that that kept me interested when the writing wasn't doing it. In fact, I actually liked Arnie in this movie. I was more invested in his plight as a murder suspect. Well, he actually did it, there's evidence for it, but as somebody who was possessed and being held for murder than any of the previous victims. But he just ends up taking a backseat to Ed and Lorraine Warren taking part in a knockoff Supernatural episode. Even though they do get an antagonist in this movie in the form of the Occultist, it's only helping so much. By the end, she's just as bland as the protagonist she's facing. The writing has been an issue across this whole franchise. Both the dialogue and the storytelling are weak, and the horror elements are basic at best. While this is honestly the most I've liked a Conjuring movie since the first one, even then, it just isn't very good. Given the choice between this and A Quiet Place Part 2, I'd recommend A Quiet Place Part 2 over this any day of the week. If you enjoyed this, have at it. This franchise is just not for me, not my kind of horror, but I will say that this is better than what we've usually gotten from it. Until next time, I'm John Bailey, and if the devil made them make this movie, you'd think they would have tried harder. Greetings, Internet. I'm John Bailey, the Popcorn Junkie, and it's a cat playing with plastic. My producer, everybody. My producer, interrupting my takes. I love you too.